On the far edge of the known world, beyond the storms of the North Atlantic, lies a frozen land shaped by fury, survival, and the indomitable will of one man. A man whose exile became discovery, whose anger forged a nation, and whose legacy carved the roots of Norse exploration. A slow reveal of icy cliffs and drifting fog. This is the story of Erik Thorvaldsson, known to history as Erik the Red, warrior, outlaw, explorer, and the founder of the first European settlement in Greenland. Erik's story begins around 950 AD in the rugged coastal region of Rogaland, Norway. This was an age when power was shifting. Norwegian chieftains, once locked in constant battle, were now uniting under a stronger monarchy. And when kings consolidate power, someone always pays the price. Erik's father, Thorvald Asvaldsson, was one of those men. Accused of killings, whether in self-defense or blood feud, nobody truly knows, he was exiled from Norway. In Viking culture, exile was no small punishment. It meant leaving everything: your land, your honor, your ancestors' graves. So Thorvald packed what he could, gathered his family, and set sail westward. Little Erik, no more than 10, watched the Norwegian coastline fade behind him forever. This early trauma shaped Erik deeply. Exile wasn't just something that happened to him, it became the rhythm of his life, a pattern he would repeat, willingly or not, again and again. Iceland was the frontier of the Viking world, raw, volcanic, unforgiving. When the family arrived, they joined thousands of Norse settlers trying to forge a new life from steam, ash, and ice. Erik grew into a towering red-haired man, strong, quick to anger but respected for his skill with weapons and tools alike. He married Thjodhild, a woman of influence, and built a homestead on Iceland's western edge. Life here was harsh. Winters buried farms under snow. Summers brought volcanic ash instead of fertile soil. But the Icelanders were hardier still, toughened by a world that tested them daily. In this crucible, Erik's temper grew sharp. Feuds were common. Disputes over livestock, property, or honor could escalate into bloodshed quickly, and it was only a matter of time before Erik's fiery nature ignited a conflict that would change everything. To survive on Iceland meant relying on neighbors, but it also meant clashing with them. Livestock wandered, boundaries blurred, tempers flared. Tensions simmered between Erik and his neighbor Thorgest. What began as a disagreement over borrowed wooden beams spiraled into a feud, as Viking feuds often did. When those beams weren't returned, voices rose. When voices rose, threats followed. And when threats were exchanged, weapons were soon drawn. This conflict dragged in families, friends, and allies. In a single violent clash, several men were killed. And though Erik may not have started the feud, he certainly finished it with blood. The Icelandic legal council, the Althing, intervened. Their verdict was clear. Erik, son of Thorvald, was banished for 3 years. Exile had come for him once again. Most men would accept exile as defeat, but Erik was not most men. Instead of hanging his head, he looked west, to a place whispered about by sailors, a land seen but not settled, a world of cliffs, ice, and mystery. He loaded his longship with supplies, weapons, and a small band of followers. He left Iceland not in sorrow, but with the burning ambition of a man determined to carve a new future from untouched earth. As Erik pushed into the unknown, he entered waters few had dared cross. Gale winds tore at the ship. Towering waves slammed against the hull. Fog swallowed the horizon, but Erik pressed onward, guided by experience, instinct, and the promise of something greater. At last, after weeks at sea, jagged shapes broke through the mist. Not clouds, not waves, but land. The land that would define his name for 1,000 years. For 3 years, Erik explored this vast new world. The coastline stretched endlessly. Fjords sliced deep into the land. Ice fields glimmered beneath the cold sun. He found places where grass grew in summer, where wild game roamed, where waters were rich with seals and fish. These were rare treasures in the Arctic. Erik mapped what he could. He named valleys, peaks, and coastal regions. This was not exploration driven by curiosity. It was a calculated hunt for opportunity. And when his exile ended, he knew exactly what he would do next. He would return to Iceland and convince others to follow him into this frontier. When Erik returned to Iceland, he brought tales of a land larger than Iceland itself, a place with open valleys, untouched resources, and enough space for thousands of settlers. But Erik understood the power of persuasion better than most. He knew what people wanted, and he used it well. He called the new land Greenland. The name was not a lie, but it was certainly optimistic. He believed a pleasant name would draw settlers, and he was right. Viking society was crowded, competitive, and hungry for new territory. Soon, men and women from across Iceland prepared their ships, not because they trusted the land, but because they believed in Erik.
Erik's gamble worked. Hundreds joined him. The fleet set off in 985 AD. Some ships lost to storms, some forced back. But those who made it discovered a world both beautiful and brutal. Greenland's coasts were indeed green in summer, but the winters were merciless. Yet the settlers persevered, carving farms along the fjords, raising cattle, hunting seals, and building a society in one of Earth's harshest environments. Erik declared himself chieftain of Brattle, the principal settlement. Here he ruled with strength, diplomacy, and, when necessary, intimidation. Greenland's Norse era had begun. When Erik returned to Iceland after exploring the far western land, he spoke like a man carrying divine revelation. His words were vivid, persuasive, almost poetic as he described the fjords, the meadows, and the untouched promise of the new land. But many Icelanders remembered Erik's past. His temper, his feuds, his exile. Why trust a man known as both visionary and killer? Erik understood this better than anyone, so he didn't rely solely on reputation. He relied on strategy. He told chieftains that Greenland's valleys could support cattle herds. He told fishermen that the coasts overflowed with seals and walrus. He told families that fertile land was waiting for them, land they could own, not rent or inherit. In a society cramped by limited farmland and political tension, the offer was irresistible. By the time Erik finished, 25 ships prepared for the voyage. Men, women, children, livestock, timber, tools, everything needed to build a new world. It was one of the largest migrations in Viking history, and at the center of it all was Erik, guiding a people toward a land he intended to rule. The journey to Greenland was brutal. Of the 25 ships that set sail, only 14 arrived. The rest were lost to storms or forced to turn back. Those who survived stepped onto a land of contradictions. Harsh yet beautiful, silent yet full of life. Erik led them inland through the fjords until they reached a fertile valley he had chosen years earlier. Here, Erik established Brattle, his estate. It became the beating heart of Norse Greenland. Farmers built turf houses. Hunters ventured into icy waters. Families raised livestock and carved out fields in the thin Arctic soil. The early years were harsh. Winters tested every soul. But the people endured because they believed in the promise Erik had given them. Greenland was not an easy home, but it was their home. And Erik, through charisma and strength, became its undisputed leader, its chieftain, its judge, and its symbol of survival. Among those who followed Erik was his son, Leif Erikson, a young man destined to become even more famous than his father. Leif grew up in Greenland's harsh reality, herding livestock across frozen fields, rowing boats through icy fjords, learning to hunt seals in waters where one mistake meant death. Erik taught him strength, boldness, and determination. But Leif was different from his father. Where Erik was fiery and quick to anger, Leif was thoughtful, patient, and curious. He sought knowledge, not conflict, exploration, not feuds. Yet father and son shared something deeper, a restless hunger to venture beyond the horizon. It was Erik's pioneering spirit that Leif inherited. And it was Leif who would eventually carry the Viking legacy even farther west, to the shores of North America. But that chapter belongs to another saga. For now, Erik the Red remained the patriarch of a settlement struggling to survive. Years passed, and Greenland's Norse community grew. They built churches, traded with Europe, and expanded their farms across the fjords. Erik presided over it all. But time, like the Arctic wind, spares no one. According to the sagas, a moment of misfortune struck Erik at a time when destiny called for him to join an expedition. As Leif prepared for his legendary voyage westward, Erik mounted his horse, only for the animal to stumble violently. Erik was thrown to the ground, badly injured. The fall left him unable to travel, and many believed it was an omen, a sign that fate forbade him from joining the expedition. To a man defined by adventure, ambition, and leadership, this was a bitter blow. He watched as Leif set sail without him, heading into the unknown. The torch of exploration passed from father to son, not by choice, but by necessity. Greenland's early success came with a price. Winters could last 9 months. Blizzards buried entire homesteads. Livestock died, crops failed, and families sometimes starved. But the challenges forged a resilient people. They traded walrus ivory, furs, and rope with Europe. They hunted caribou and seals with remarkable skill. They built boats, raised livestock, and celebrated feasts in longhouses lit by oil lamps. Still, every winter was a gamble. Every summer a race against time. For Erik, the hardship was a reminder that leadership meant more than strength. It meant responsibility. He settled disputes, organized hunts, judged feuds, and brokered peace. He became the backbone of a society surviving on the edge of the world. Yet even the strongest leaders age. Erik's hair grew whiter, his steps slowed, and the land he fought so hard to claim began to outlast him. Like all Viking legends, Erik the Red's story blends truth and myth. The sagas were written centuries after the events they describe, shaped by memory, imagination, and political agenda. Was Erik a brutal outlaw or a visionary pioneer? A violent chieftain or a charismatic leader? A man of fire or a man forged by circumstance? The truth lies somewhere between. Archaeology shows us the settlements he founded. Ruins of turf houses remain. Tools, ornaments, and farms still sit in Greenland's fjords. These are real. The legacy is real. But the sagas? They turn him into a symbol of exploration, defiance, and the indomitable human will to push farther, even when the world itself seems to push back. Erik the Red lives on because humans cling to stories of those who dared to go first. Erik spent his later years in Brattle, surrounded by family, followers, and the land he carved from wilderness. Injuries and age slowed him, but his influence remained strong. He watched Greenland's settlements expand. He saw children raised in a land their ancestors never knew. He witnessed the rise of churches, the arrival of traders, and the birth of new families. But he also felt the weight of time. His fiery temper softened, replaced by reflection. The sagas tell little of his final days, except that he died in Greenland, the land he discovered, named, and claimed. He began life in exile, and ended it as the founder of a nation carved from ice. Erik the Red's legacy is a strange one, half history, half legend. A man who fled Norway, fought in Iceland, discovered Greenland, and fathered the first European explorer to set foot in North America. His story is a reminder that greatness often emerges from flaw, that ambition and temper can build as much as they destroy, that sometimes the most powerful force in history is a single individual willing to push into the unknown. Greenland's Norse settlements eventually faded, but the spirit that built them did not. Erik's legacy lives in every story of exploration, every tale of men and women who challenged the edges of the map, and every reminder that human courage thrives even in the coldest of worlds. Erik the Red, outlaw, explorer, pioneer, father of discovery, remains one of the most formidable figures of the Viking Age. And though centuries have passed, his fire still burns.